And we're going. So folks should be trickling in.
Nice. Wait a little bit, 3 minutes after, or do we just kick it off at 1?
You can take like a minute or two, yeah, a few minutes just for folks to log on.
Good afternoon, welcome. We'll start start shortly here. All right, everyone, welcome to the Men of Color Student Leadership Institute, the Pathology of Pain, Black Mental Health. My name is Dr. Abdulmalik Bull. I'm a counseling faculty here at San Diego City College. I'm also the Transfer Center Director in the counseling department. And then I'm also a lecturer at the College of Education, Department of Counseling and School Psychology at San Diego State. And I teach restorative justice practices to future counselors in the graduate program. Go ahead and follow me on IG at Doc Bull and at Twitter at Abdulmalik Bull. And I want you to do something that you probably have not done in some of these webinars. I want you to start live tweeting or live sharing in stories in regarding the knowledge that we're going to be acting upon today. And I say that because we're trying to make this webinar as interactive as possible. And so I want to kind of give space to that opportunity here, engage you all at a level that we all can, connect to in social media. So please feel free to do that and I'll get those notifications. And so let's unpack. The first thing is important for me always in any webinar or situation or discussion or presentation. It's always important to have shared language, right? And so we need to understand what is mental health and what is mental illness, right? So mental health, as illustrated in this graphic, is your general state of well-being and state of mind, something that should be looked after, right? That is your mental health. And the mental illness is something that disrupts your mental state and interrupts how you feel, think, communicate, and behave. And so it's important that we kind of dissect that in the pathology of pain and understanding why our mental health and our mental illness are distinct, but our mental illness can impact our mental health. I also want to define trauma, and it's important to define trauma as we move along this discussion because it's something that we completely and constantly are engaging in. And that is, so they define trauma as a traumatic event involves a single experience or an enduring or repeated events that completely overwhelm the individual's ability to cope or integrate ideas and emotions involved in that experience. It involves feelings of complete helplessness in the face of real or perceived threat to one's life or that of loved ones to bodily integrity or sanity. And there's frequent violation of a person's familiar ideas about the world and their human rights, putting that person in an extreme state of confusion and insecurity. And both reactions are psychological and physiological. And it's important in the context of police brutality, some of us, witnessing, shooting after one after the other repeatedly on replay, some of us may feel complete helplessness, like how many more hashtags do we need? How many more Trayvon Martin's, Michael Brown's, Fernando Castillo, Alton Sterling's, George Floyd's, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland. I mean, we can name consistently the hashtags of all the Black lives that were taken by state-sanctioned violence consistently and constantly. And so for us, in the system of white supremacy, understanding that some people can have this trauma repeated over and over and over, and they feel a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. And it is a threat to their lives. And so when you do engage a police officer, you do engage state-sanctioned, individuals, that you may see yourself freezing. You may see a psychological, physiological reaction to that. And they also think about the folks that came from the genesis of the vicious legacy of white supremacy and racism. So I want to play a clip here by Marshawn Lynch to help us define that as well.
It's a vulnerable time for a lot of these young. Look, I'll say like this though, right? It's a vulnerable time for a lot of these young dudes, you feel me? They don't be taking care of their chicken. So if it was me, or if I had an opportunity to let these little young Sahabs know something, I say take care of y'all money, African, because that shit don't last forever. Now, I done been on the other side of retirement, and it's good when you get over there and you can do what the fuck you want to. So I tell y'all right now, while y'all in it, take care of y'all bread. So when y'all done, you go ahead and take care of yourself. So while y'all don't take care of y'all bodies, you know what I mean? Don't take care of y'all chicken. You feel me? Don't take care of y'all mentals, because look, we ain't lasting that long. I had a couple of players that I played with that, they no longer here no more. They no longer. So, you feel me? Start taking care of y'all mentals, y'all bodies, and y'all chicken. When y'all, ready to walk away and be able to do what you want to do. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
And so that's Marshawn Lynch eloquently stating the importance, and I use Marshawn Lynch because I think some of us can relate, what it means to take care of your chicken and your mentals. We see it in a lot of spaces where as young Black men and young men of color, you learn what it takes to be a man. It's like a playbook: be strong, don't talk about your feelings, get through it on your own. And these are coping mechanisms. These are ways in which you deal with mental health stressors. And they are not necessarily aspects of you actually wanting to heal. And there's a fundamental difference in that. And so we want to unpack really today and tackle on some of these misnomers and where do they come from? So this is not new to us. You look at lynching. This is an image of a young white woman who is actually smiling at the lynching of a Black man. And so there's a historical context of watching Black folk die consistently. And so back then it was documented as images and pictures. Now it's on cell phones and videos, and it's on repeat when you watch your TV. It goes viral on social media. And so that hasn't changed. The imagery hasn't changed. So watching this young man have his life traumatically taken from him and people enjoying that. You also see George Floyd. You see, Fernando Castillo. You see Alton Sterling. Some of them actually dying in front of people for a long period of time as their life leaves their body. And so this trauma also leads to a numbness. And this person's also traumatized. They're numb. And so hopefully today we can kind of unpack this numbness that we have to this consistent and constant barrage of Black folk dying and what that does to our mental state. And so that's why they say Black Americans are 20% more likely to experience serious mental health problems than the general population. Because there's a history here. There's a history of the vicious legacy of white supremacy. There's a history of the consistent and constant barrage of your life not mattering, right? And so then you're going to be in an extreme state of polarization and hyper attention of how you're considered overwhelmed by these images. And so what comes from that? Depression, anxiety, right? Folks really start to take certain aspects of their mental illness, and they start to really have, PTSD. Folks start to use addiction, and they start to work with, drugs and other products to cope with that, right? And so there's these physiological, psychological aspects that happen when you start to see this trauma consistently happening. And so the U.S. Surgeon General mentioned that there are disparities in mental health. And for Black folk, we're dealing with 4 levels here. And these are they have adverse impact on our mental health, which means they have a negative impact. And so racism is right there. Discrimination is right next to it. We have violence. And so think about constantly being exposed to conditions and environments where there's a lot of violence. So you see that in the neighborhoods that we grew up in, right? People getting jumped on your way to school, dogs chasing people. You probably grew up in a home where you got your butt whooped, you know what I mean? And that just becomes second nature to folks. But that violence after a while has an impact on your mental health. It becomes normal in terms of the way you cope and deal with things. Poverty. We're always trying to figure out a way to make an extra buck because of the socioeconomic conditions of Black folk, right? And we were consistently in these socioeconomic environments where, because of poverty, we're used to hustling, we're used to dealing, we're used to making ends meet, legally and illegally. And so that becomes a compounded oppression in terms of your mental health. And then you're always having to deal with parents that are saying, man, single parents saying, how can I provide for my children, right? How can I get them out of these conditions and support them? And so that actually has a stressor on anxiety, man. Can I go get another job, working 2 jobs now, working overtime? And so this consistent need to provide for your family and that added pressure leads to anxiety. And so because of our socioeconomic conditions, because of the racism they're exposed, discrimination based upon the funding of our schools in terms of access to jobs and resources, and consistent and constant violence within our community, and state-sanctioned violence from entities of the government, such as the police, right? This leads consistently to have us have a 20% higher rate. And so for Black males specifically, if you unpack what's going on with Black males, we start to see there's 5 stressors: money and finances, lack of economic opportunities, and the inability to make ends meet. On the poverty index, we're the lowest. And that's why it's important for a lot of brothers here that we're going to get our degrees so you can provide an opportunity to access middle-class jobs and access opportunities, right? That's very, very instrumental. But then we also have race and racism and those negative stereotypes, those that we internalize and those that are institutional, right? Those that if the system is telling you, ninjas ain't shit all day, and you internalize that, then you think that. You start to perform like that. You start to act like that. You start to rap like that. You start to get glorified like that. And so then you have this glorified version of yourself that's not really you because of what race and racism gave you. And so it's very, very important for us to kind of unpack that and see where that comes from and how do we internalize these racist structures. But then we also have to deal with the fact that you got to provide, and you got to go to school, and you got to go to work, and you may be qualified for jobs, and you don't get these opportunities because of the ways that they depicted you. And that's why it's important. I'm gonna make a point here. You might want to quote this. We have to be rooted in who we are, not restricted by who we are. And we have to understand that your identity is solid. Your Africanness, your Blackness, is your brownness solidifies you and gives you agency in how you operate this world. So you ain't gotta cut corners or take on these, Eurocentric dominant themes of feeling inferior. That you are enough. And then you need that positive self-talk sometimes to tell you that I am enough. Jobs and career. Difficulties of finding, succeeding at a job or career. I do a lot of anti-racist trainings for a lot of institutions. They always ask me, we would like for us to, diversify our workforce. And I say, okay, a young Black and brown man comes to your company to interview. You ask them the question, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? This is moving up within your company. But they look at your org chart, they look at your leadership structure, they look at your executive team, and they don't see them reflected. And so how then do they have, any type of commitment to that company to grow? And so, yeah, you go into these spaces as the only one. And Dr. Sean Harper talks about this called onlyness. And so you're the only person in that space. Even if you get that job, you're having to represent the whole community. And then next thing you feel isolated. Your culture, you deal with microaggressions consistently and constantly. And that has an impact on your mental health. Relationships and family, struggles in relationship with significant other, hurt people. A lot of us come from this hamster wheel of trauma that we're consistently hurt in the cycle. So we want to continuously hurt others intentionally or unintentionally, because that's the only way we know how to resolve conflict. And yet, at what point does that cycle stop? That's a fundamental question we have to ask ourselves. How do we do that? How do we push back against that? And then health and illness. And we'll talk about that, the access to health, the way you can go about when we're sick. And this study found that racial discrimination in mental health, they said that nearly 17% of African Americans were uninsured in 2014 as compared to 11% for white Americans. So not only do we not have opportunities to be taken care of at these institutions, we don't have access, right? Then this other study mentioned that only 53% of African Americans who are diagnosed with major depressive disorders received mental health care in 2011, as compared to 73% for white Americans. That means 2 out of every 4 Black folk walk in and they don't get the help that they need. Yet 3 out of 4 white Americans go in and they'll get the help they need. And so that, to me, is also symptomatic of even the institutions that deal with mental health, right? So in a study conducted by the American Psychological Association Center and Workforce Studies in 2015, researchers found that 83.6% of active psychologists were white Americans. And so going back to that thing that I was saying earlier, you're not really dealing with that. You're just race baiting. You're victimizing yourself. Stop being a victim, right? We're noticing that actually has translation in data points. And so now there's systems not even assisting you in dealing with that. And so even those that do find the courage to go out and actually deal and try to help resolve some of the mental health challenges they're having, the system is still rejecting you. This is interesting. They found that out of 623 Black men who were violently injured, and violent injury here is childhood adversity, neighborhood disadvantage, violence, mental health outcomes. They mentioned that out of those 623, 55% of those were violently injured. 45% of these patients met the criteria for mental health diagnosis at 3 months. And so again, that violence piece that's impacting our community and our injuries, nearly half of those people meet the criteria to receive mental health services and support. And so now half of us are qualifying for that. And then only half of those who actually qualify, half of those who actually are recommended for that actually qualify and get treated. So it's a small amount of folks here, half of half, that's actually being treated for mental health. And so why don't we seek treatment? Well, obviously we give you the systemic institutional racism that exists, but also the personal biases and things that we don't have in accessing our agency and saying, it's not a bad thing to request help. So here's one of the myths that's common, having a mental illness means that you cannot have positive mental health. And the reality is enhancing positive mental health is possible for everyone, even those with a mental illness. Even if you're suffering from, eating disorders, even if you're suffering from depression, even if you're, suffering from anxiety, right? Enhancing, tapping into your mental health, seeking treatment and resources and support allows you to be at a better mental health state. Here's another problem that we're always telling the community, man, just think positive, it'll go away, man, just be positive. Yeah, it's true. pray about it, absolutely, but you gotta like do the work. You know, as a cultural tradition, we say, you know, tie your camel, which means, you know, you don't let your camel just go out and just graze. You gotta tie it and then, you know, park your car. You don't leave it in the middle of the street with your keys in there, right? Like, you do your part and leave the rest to whatever out of your hands. If you pray to a higher power, if you don't want to think positive, if you want to meditate, absolutely, but you've got to seek treatment. And that is the absolute important piece here, that we must seek treatment. And we don't necessarily want to do that because of the pain that we're consistently under and the barrage of that. And so then we start to having these self-fulfilling prophecies of negative doubt and say, you know what, it'll go away. I just got to muster through it. That's because we're Black and excellent. We've continuously done that through colonization, through slavery, through, you know, Jim Crow. We're just consistently like, you know, pushing through being excellent. And so this perseverance becomes an aspect of us actually pushing through as the norm when it's not the norm. That's the power that you tap into. The norm is actually to seek treatment and help and be vulnerable. And that's not a sign of weakness, despite what is said. And so mental health illness robs a person the ability to think positive about themselves and their future. And so when you say that, you're just brushing aside that illness has serious repercussions for that person. When you say it or others say it too. And so it's important that we don't internalize these aspects of who we are and how we seek treatment when it comes to mental health. And this is important because I really want to unpack that for a bit more. Because we're Black or brown, because we're communities of color, we've taken on language that's not necessarily accurate. For example, we say slaves. No one's a slave. People are enslaved. It's a fundamental difference between being a slave and enslaved, right? Enslaved African means that was the condition in which you are, as opposed to a slave, the noun of who you are as a person. And so even that, pushing back on that, is very, very important. You talk about minorities, right? When you look at the global structure of this world, people of color are not the minorities. In fact, they're the overwhelming majority. And so we got to put back and say, you know what, these are minoritized individuals. Even the term immigrants, for a lot of our brown brothers and sisters, they're indigenous to this land. They're indigenous to this space. And so how then do we call them, you know, minoritized or minorities, right? Or others. And so to me, it's important that we take back our language, understand our power of who we are and identity and agency of who you are and who you be. And then you can push back against that. You can push back against that. But as the African proverb says, you got to know who you are. You got to know where you're coming from in order to know where you're headed. And so a lot of us don't even know or tap into our roots. And in that is a lot of healing. In that is a lot of positivity. In that is a lot of, reassurance and restoration of self. And so that gives you a sense of clarity in your mental health of who you can be and who you are. And therefore, you're not subscribing to be Bill Gates when you know the world's wealthiest man was Mansa Musa, right? You're not ascribing to be, these political leaders or celebrities when you come from a tradition of kings and kingdoms, like the Mali Empire, like the Shanghai Empire. And so consistently and constantly, your mental health and this trauma is consistently inflicted from K through 12. And we see that. You haven't seen yourselves in your classrooms. You haven't seen yourselves in your curriculum, the books that you've read. And the movies that you've seen are consistent stereotypes. I grew up Boys in the Hood, Don't Be a Menace, you know what I mean? All these, stereotypes within our community. And even Tyler Perry's movies are trash. It's the same story recycled about someone cheated on someone beat up someone, and it's consistent trauma with these stereotypes that we're, putting in our communities. And so we need to have hope. We need to have hope and inspiration and the imagery that we condition ourselves to be engaged in, right? And so that's why, like, Black Panther was so powerful. It presented this utopia of what could be, and everyone started to wear dashikis, and everyone felt empowered even though it was this fictitious utopian land, but we felt power in that, what could be, the imagination of. And so hope is a big driver here. Hope and dream. And so dreaming and hoping are very, very instrumental in propelling you to be optimistic about your future. And so people profit consistently off your pain, but not your passions. And you have to understand that. People will leverage your pain, but not your passions for change. And so you've got to know your why, who you are in this world, how you operate, and that requires self-reflection, thinking, meditating, and you start to see yourself at peace. So when we go back to these slides and these stressors come, these stressors are existent, be it racism, discrimination, poverty, and violence, you know who you are. You have content within yourself. You have this inner peace that allows you to manifest and blossom into the flower that you are. And that's why we have roses that grow in the concrete, as Tupac says, right? Despite a lack of nourishment, despite a lack of love, despite a lack of, support, you're still able to blossom in the thick of things. You break through those concretes, structures, and barriers. And then you're an anomaly. Oh, wow. But then now you've got to take it to another level of analysis. And that level of analysis is saying, how can I dismantle these concrete and make it soil in which I can enrich my life? And so for me, it's important that part of that is understanding your agency. And it has 3 E's: educate, empower, and elevate. Educate yourself about mental health. Educate yourself about the systems and structures in which are operating to destroy your mental health. Empower yourself and those around you. And then when you do that, you will elevate the consciousness of your community. Educate, empower, elevate. And the 3 P's, your positionality, your power, and your privilege. You have to understand that you have a position to play in this world. There's only one you. God created you, and you ain't no punk. You have a role to play. And in this society, you've got to figure out what that role is for you. But that position is unique to you because there's only one you that sleeps with your body and mind and soul, that wakes up with your body, mind, and soul. So what you do with that, how you do with that, what you become with that is so important, because you're not ordinary. You're not ordinary. You're extraordinary. And because of their extraordinary ability to be who you are, you must understand what are my passion, my gifts, my talents, my treasures that I can share with the world. And understanding and unpacking that allows you to meditate and have a deep self-reflection of inquiry. That's why for my career advice, I'm like, find out what you love doing and then find out where to get paid for it. Find out what you love doing and then now try to make a living out of it. That is the best career advice I can give anybody. That's the best career advice I ever got. And so your positionality, the position that you play, the power that you tap into, and the privileges that come with that. We all have an accountability here. We all have an accountability. We all have responsibility. We're accountable to each other as brothers. We're accountable to each other within our communities and families and the people that we come from. And so that requires us to have communal uplift. And that helps you with your mental state to say, you know what? I can't take these challenges on all by myself. That sense of overwhelmingness that you will feel, that helplessness, the hopelessness will dissipate because now you have people around you that are active change agents. And so that's why it's important for us to really tap into that piece. And then lastly, the privilege that we have. We all have some type of privilege. And that is that we have the day to live. Today is a privilege for you. If you make it to tomorrow, that's another privilege, because a lot of people didn't have that privilege. And so we live by 3 days: yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yesterday is gone. We can't get it back. But what can we do with yesterday is we can learn the lessons from yesterday and do better today. The next day is tomorrow, but tomorrow's never promised. All we can do for tomorrow is prepare for it from the lessons of yesterday and the actions of today. And so if tomorrow's not promised and yesterday is gone, all we have is today. And so for a sense of peace within your mind, live day by day. Focus your goals into tangible steps and say, let me take this approach day by day. That alleviates all the pressures of what I have to do there and how I can do this over here. And no. Let's take it day by day, step by step. And that is one of the ways in which you can cope and mitigate a lot of the stressors that happen. And so increasing your knowledge is also instrumental. We talked about, the people with the least information always have the most consideration in life. And so we need to really be involved in the resources that are there to help support our community. And so here's some from the national level. If you're ever feeling a certain way, there's the peer line that you can contact. There's a disaster, distress helpline line. There's a crisis text, Mental Health America. It's a big organization across the nation. A lot of them have chapters at your institutions, at your campuses, at your cities that can help you, that can assist you. And the other piece is the national domestic, violence, and it's a lot of us may not necessarily be involved in that, but may be products of that, right? People may be products of a house of a DV. Another important resource here is the National Suicide Prevention Line. It's important that you have this if you're feeling a certain way. A lot of us don't seek help. We don't want to be vulnerable in that regard, and we don't want to be consistently and constantly engaging with hopelessness scenarios that force us to feel suicidal. And so if you ever come to that level, please unpack that. Take that number and please contact that. It's a resource. Your campuses have a lot of resources available for you in regards to mental health. Some of your colleges and universities should have a health department, a clinic, and in that clinic there should be a practitioner, either a therapist, psychiatrist, counselor that you can see, social worker. Make sure that you see these folks. It's important for your mental health. As Black men, we look at Kanye West. We look at Dave Chappelle, who left $50 million on the table for his mental health. We look at Charlemagne, who wrote a book about that. We look at, how we deal with mental health. And now we're being vulnerable in that regard. I showed you the clip of Marshawn Lynch saying, take care of your mentals. So mental health for us as Black men and brown men, we're starting to see that it's actually something that we need to really consider and be open to. And your vulnerability, again, is not your weakness. It's something that's very, very common. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and allow questions to come through the chat. I'm gonna stop sharing. And we'll take on some questions through the chat box here.
Hey, Dr. Bull, somebody was asking if they could see the last slide. Pull that up.
Yes, can you see it? That's Doc Bull's my IG handle, and then Twitter. There's a Twitter handle. And if you have any questions that you want to pose in those outlets, we could do that as well. Let me see. Absolutely. How many more hashtags do we need?
Dr. Bull, if you could put the slides with the resources.
Yeah, so here's the nationwide peer line, and then the helpline, the crisis text line. And I also recommend a lot of you follow or should follow some positivity messages that come out of like some of these IG or Twitter pages, Black mental health, there's quite a few of them out there that are very, very positive in reaffirming your just your mind, body, and spirit. And it's holistic, y'all. Like your total health is important. You know, COVID-19 exposed and unearthed a lot of the traumatic stressors that we're dealing with. And so a lot of people were exposed to, a lot of Black folks had higher death rates, much more disproportionate than white folks. And that's because of, you know, not just access to resources, but the way we're, you know, living in these buildings and apartment complexes, not able to quarantine, but a lot of also our health disparities. So diabetes, high blood pressure, asthma. And so eating right is very, very instrumental to our mental health and to our physical health, because that stressor makes you, you know, we have to decolonize our diets. The foods that we eat actually impact the way we think and our self-value and self-worth. And we saw that in a deadly fashion, COVID-19. We'll also see that in a deleterious impact when it comes to the ways in which we have a sense of self and self-worth. I'll share this other line here, this other slide. All right, are you able to see the chat, Caesar?
Yes.
Okay, so, but what can we do when we are sparingly representing the field of mental health and are in need of somebody who's understanding of our issues? That's a phenomenal question. You know, that's why I encourage a lot of, you know, there's multiple strategies to that, right? Number one is we need to access these fields. We need to access more practitioners in the mental health field. So we need absolutely more Black mental health you know, practitioners. That includes therapists, that includes counselors, that includes psychiatrists, that includes psychologists, right? And so we need to also be these professions and fields and access them. We also need to take care of theories within these fields, right? And so the ways in which they're defined, trauma, the ways in which you know, we identify with these stressors, we need to take back some of that and have a cultural lens, a Black lens, a brown lens, a more, you know, indigenous perspective on some of these Eurocentric philosophies. If you look at some of the psychiatrists and psychologists, the founding fathers like Carl Brigham and some of these people were complete racists. They believed in Black inferiority. In fact, quite a few of them believed that we were, you know, they believed in eugenics. And so it's important that we push back against that and we actually go into the field. The other part is we support, now because of COVID-19 and everything virtual, there's a lot of Black therapists out there that we support their resources, and then we support the providing and trainings and you know, when we talk about support Black businesses, support Black therapists, you know? And so that's important, that we definitely support those folks in that field. I have a student in high school who makes music. How can they go to school to get paid for what they love? The music industry? You know, this is a good question. You know, I'm all about pushing back against certain aspects of how we view success, right? And what our definitions of success are. Some of us, you know, is monetary. Some of it is fame. Some of it is happiness, right? It's something that allows you to wake up every single day in the morning, day in and day out, for years and years and years, and actually love what you're doing. And so despite who you work with, in spite of how many years you have to do it, you still want to do it. Because oftentimes we can't control our boss, we can't control our colleagues and coworkers, but you can control your passion, your calling, and the why of what you do. And that's why it's important that some of us, when we look at careers here, we actually engage in careers that are callings, not a passion, not a job pays the bill, you know, passion, you're very passionate about, that can dissipate, but a calling taps into your passion and also taps into your talent. And if you're able to find your calling, even when your students let you down, even when your professors let you down, even when your leadership lets you down, you're still able to persist and push through. And that's very, very important for us to understand why, it's important for us to look at careers that, resemble who we are. Is there another question here?
There was a comment by Joe Carey. He put, as a culture, we must first get comfortable with the idea of therapy.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, we do, and I think we've been conditioned not to. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. I'm going to share with you all my screen here again. What's your perspective on psychopharmacology and treaty diagnosis within our community? I believe we're completely overdiagnosed. A lot of the theorists, can you give me share screen rights, Caesar? And so it's important that we unpack some of this, because some of the people that are founding metrics for a lot of these fields, such as biology, psychology, were racist. And so we are overrepresented because the theories and the assessment tools are racist. So I'll give you an example. Commentator Buffon was the father of all thought in natural history, the second 18th century. He believed that Adam and Eve were Caucasian and that other races came about degeneration from the Caucasian race. And so that because of the environmental factors, we are a degenerative aspect of whiteness. And this is important because outside of Aristotle and Darwin, no other student of organisms, biology, and plants has had a far-reaching influence than he did. You look at Carlton Stephen Coons. He's the founder of American physical anthropology, the way we classify people. The lecturer at Harvard. He believed the darker skinned, the less intelligent people were. Coons' work often, was used by segregationists. And so he wrote this book called The Origins of Race, very widely popular, used the term Caucasoid and white race synonymously. And this book was actually the doctrine in which the segregation in the South utilized to push this separate but equal philosophy. And then here is why it's important to really understand the history of psychology and mental health. Campbell Brigham, professor of psychology at Princeton. He ran the Department of Psychology. He was the pioneer field of psychometrics. So your question here, I'm going to answer it directly. The founding theorist and pioneer of psychometrics was Campbell Brigham here. He concluded blacks were intellectually deficient in native or inborn intelligence and lacked intelligence, and argued they would likely lead to the decline of nations. If Obama ever led this country, it would be in hellhole. And if Trump ever led it, it will never be where it is today. I mean, we can see him being refuted in front of our face. He believed in eugenics. He argued that Caucasians tested the highest and immigration should be looked at to preserve American intelligence. Does that sound something familiar? Why do we get immigrants from S-hole countries, right? He believed to preserve American intelligence that we should cap immigration. And he's the founder of the Princeton test, which later became the SAT. So the SATs, through psychometrics, is the most racist tool out there, despite the fact that you can't utilize socioeconomic conditions for people who have access to tutors. Outside of the fact that it's not even a predictor of success, the founding person was this individual, completely racist, believed that black people were inferior, and believed in white supremacy. And so they use this tool as an admissions tool, the SAT is an admission tool, and that's why we have the outcomes that we get today, right? Why do we say, our people feel less intelligent, when the founding, practitioners and pioneers of the field of psychometrics are the same way. And same thing when it comes to the aspect of any of these assessments, right? How do you have the wherewithal and the capacity to assess our students without a cultural lens and depict them to be, behavioral, behavioral challenges. And so that's why we see the preschool to prison pipeline occur. We see that labeling happening at a very young age, then that taking on that label and the stereotype threat that comes with that label, and then absolutely what else comes after that will come. So you're gifted, you're not gifted. You're a troublemaker, you're talented, you're an honor student. And we label them all the way up until they get out of the system. So your GPA then becomes a label. I'm a 3.4 student, I'm a 4.0 student. As if these are like antiquated things which we take on an identity that we push on ourselves. And so we psychologically believe, oh, I'm a 2.0 student. Oh, I'm not college material. Oh, I'm college material. And so these things start to play out. The psychosis of this labeling and this assessment consistently metastasizes themselves into your productivity and your actions. And so absolutely, I completely reject the field of psychopharmacology and psychometrics because they do not have a cultural lens and understanding of what it means to be Black or brown or indigenous. And so until they get more cultural nutrients in there, until these 86.3% of folks in this field understand what it means empathetically and sympathetically to be from these communities and to assess them and have research that's indicative of that, then we can have a different conversation. But at the moment, that is a vessel of white supremacy and racism. I've had heated arguments with some of my friends about the doll test. I feel like it is my stand that even the research that they do is going to give desired results, which is wrong. Absolutely. Again, the research that's been given, and I've studied this field quite a bit, as you can see in the slides here. Absolutely, the field of psychology and a lot of the assessments and the tools and some of the, so-called theorists are deeply problematic. And so we've taken these conditions and we've taken these assessments on, and then we've then utilized them to, measure our intelligence, measure our behavioral index, right? If Timothy is coloring outside the lines, and Timothy is white here, he's Van Gogh, he's the next Picasso. If Dante and Tyrone and Jorge are coloring outside the lines, they're delinquent, they can't focus, they have an inability to follow direction, they're being insubordinate, and so forth. You take these two actions that are parallel, same, different outcomes, because the ways in which we've conditioned ourselves. And so races have been absent from that analysis, and I think it's very, very instrumental that we definitely have that part of it. Let me see here. Do you offer any works of webinars for restorative justice? I do. I teach a whole class on that. You can sign up for my class, or follow me on IG and Instagram and Facebook, Twitter. We can figure that out. And restorative justice here is very, very important. Restorative justice actually is an African practice. It ain't something new that not just Native Americans here or Australians or Switzerland's practicing. We come from tribes. Tribes would come, cultures would come, and it would sit and it would mediate between the offender and the victim. And they would construct a vision of how that healing would look like, how restoration of the harm that was done was look like. So we don't necessarily subscribe to Eurocentric values of restorative justice. And restorative justice is very, very important to us because a lot of us have one or two family members that have been impacted by the criminal justice system. And as such, they're labeled as criminals, convicts, right? This is a label that people take on. Restorative justice says, you know what? You're not a sum of your mistakes, and that you actually have retribution to reality. And so there's justice in that regard. That we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't just incarcerate the individual. We actually have a rehabilitation process that restores that person's dignity, humanity, and the harm that they have caused. And so that's important as well. As we look in our communities and we have people come out and we say, felons, ex-felon, convict, these are labels and terms that are really, really want us to be cognizant, similar to the way that we took on slave, right, versus enslaved. An enslaved African is different than a slave. Condition, cause they were in, that was out of their hands, as opposed to a noun and something that were born into. Let me see other questions here. Am I missing any questions, Caesar?
Let's see. I think that was it.
Yeah, I encourage everyone here to really reassess and reprogram the way we look at mental health. You know, I consistently seek therapy myself. It helps me process my feelings, my thoughts, and we do this. We do it in a very informal fashion. Oh, let me chop it up with you, homie, real quick, man. Let me bounce the idea off you real quick, man. You know, I'm thinking about this, and so we have a lot of armchair quarterbacking within our community of therapy and counseling, right? Man, I'm feeling stuff. Let me holler at you real quick. But you know, let me holler at you real quick and let me run something by you. And getting advice from your homie is good, because sometimes it, you know, gets you to reflect your ideas. But then also you need someone that's skilled and expert, that's trained into really reframing some of the statements that you're saying and helping you unpack and diagnosing some of that, and then leading to healing work. And I'll leave you all with this, you know, because oftentimes we confuse, you know, healing versus coping, right? And healing is a little bit different than coping. You know, coping is just, you know, being able to, you know, survive a certain situation, right? So a person that's, you know, healing, you know, they're able to, a coping, like, you know, how do I survive this next physical altercation? Like, you know, if you had a bully or something like that, okay, you know what? A coping mechanism is like, you know, which route do I take to school? How can I avoid this person, you know, this bully? You know, how do I avoid this for the rest of the day? And so you cope with that. You know, healing is like, let's remove the whole condition of bullying out of the whole system. And so it's important that we move away from coping, right? That's, you know, medicating and, you know, other aspects that we have in terms of just adjusting to the primitive, really, conditions of oppression that we're under, into healing, which is saying, hey, it's like a Band-Aid, right? A coping mechanism is putting a wound, you can put a Band-Aid on it. Healing is having deep surgery, taking that out, you know, getting the necessary root of that illness and disease, healing it, completely closing it, and then letting that wound heal. And that takes time. But that requires a surgical precision that you have to understand that this is gonna get ugly. It's gonna get bloody. We have to pull some stuff out, right? We have to unearth certain things. And so part of mental health and part of the healing process and seeking therapy is, man, you're gonna unpack some things that you do not wanna unpack, but it's gonna make you better because you're able to deal with those situations. And it's a little game of like those chipmunks or golfers, whatever, like you hit one, if you don't deal with it, it's gonna pop up. You know, if you don't deal with certain things that have dramatically impacted your life, you're gonna see yourself in relationships, in your work, in other aspects, your friendships, in your professional setting, that stuff will start to pop up. And so you've got to deal with it. That's why it's important to heal. Healing is really getting at the root of it, dismantling that, you know, issue from the root cause, and then allowing some of that healing to happen. Coping is like, how do I, you know, get by? And so a lot of us are in coping mode right now. We're wounded healers. I get it, but we want to move towards healing. I served 10 years in prison, and I'm now a Rio Sound College Student Center with a 4.0 GPA, not because of penetration, but in spite of the system. Brotherhood and education of self is key. Absolutely. You know what I mean? Thank you for sharing that, Cordero. I mean, man, Malcolm X was a reformed pimp. He was Detroit Red when he went into that pen. Came out not just a revolutionary for civil rights, but a global icon. Malcolm took it to not just civil rights, he took it to human rights. Post-Malcolm Malcolm was a human rights activist without a degree. Now, I'm not saying don't get your degree, because Martin Luther King had a PhD. You know what I mean? But from Harvard, went to Morehouse undergrad. You know, and you also have Malcolm X. He got a PhD in the streets and in the pen. And so, again, it's about who you are. But he found out in that the time that he spent as Detroit Red in prison, he had a lot of time to meditate, reflect, tap into his identity and spiritual, mental, physical health, overcome, if you read autobiography of Malcolm X, overcome a lot of the psychological trauma that he was exposed to as a child, you know, father being killed, you know, they took him out of the house, as his mother says. And so these things are important. And so, yes, salute to you, my brother. 10 years in the pen, you're not a 4.0 student, man, you're a scholar. You know what I mean? You're a scholar. And that's who we should be. We should be taking on these identities, not just baseline. Like, you're a scholar. You come into that classroom, Cordero, you have as much to give and to learn in your educational spaces. And that's your value and worth. I tell my students, man, listen, I have as much to learn from you as you are from me. And if you hold back who you are, you're withholding your educational experience and enriching this space. And as students, y'all gotta understand that and take that on. You students of color enrich our educational spaces. You enrich our educational environments. You are the reason why we educate. And so when you come into this space, be it virtual, be it in person, you bring your life experience, you bring your knowledge, you bring your wisdom, you get out that little piece of paper at the end of the day, but you're a contributor, you're a factor. And if nobody ever told you today, I'm gonna tell you right now, every single one of you on this line is a factor. You matter. Your mind matters, your body matters, your contributions matter. And so I want you to tap into that energy, tap into who you are, and step into the spaces with that brilliance and power. Because someone died, someone was killed, someone was lynched, someone was literally beaten for you to be able to be literate, for you to be able to read, for you to be able to be in these spaces. And that's the type of energy that we come with. We're not here to half-ass. We're not here to, you know, play around footsie and this and that. We're here to take over, infiltrate, dominate these systems. So tap into who you are. Don't water down who you are, double down on who you be. Don't water down who you are, double down on who you be. And once you find that out, man, sky's the limit. So thank you all for tapping in. Hope to see you all on social media. Hope to see you all throughout this phenomenal conference that's about uplifting you and your identity. You're going to be coming into these different spaces, learning different aspects of, you know, financial literacy and mental health, and, you know, ways to become a better individual. And that's what it's all about. Like, you got to wake up tomorrow better person than you were today. You just got to. And so look for that one thing that's going to make today worth it for you, to say, you know what, man, today I made a better day for myself and for the legacy in which I come from. And that could be for your parents that, you know, fought hard for you to be here. That could be for your siblings. That could be for your homies on the block. That could be your barista at Starbucks. That could be the guy at the bus station that's always rooting you on. That could be the person at your neighborhood at the corner, you know, saluting you. That could be your educator. That could be your teacher. Whoever it is, some extrinsic motivation out there rooting for you, right? And so you are bigger than who you are yourself. You represent somebody. You represent something. You represent some people. And so tap into that. Tap into that, because you matter. And if you ever feel that your mental health is compromised, or your sense of self or worth or being are diminished, let it be known that you are somebody because somebody loved you. If nobody telling you I love you, I'm gonna tell you right now, I haven't seen you, but I love you. And I love the idea of you. I love who you are right now. Tap into that. Thank y'all. Stay up.